Placing us here this morning in front of the statue of Thurgood Marshall, Maryland's son, the first African-American Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. It's really fitting that we are here in front of his statue. We want to talk about racial profiling, and let me say first that the police in our state and throughout the country have incredibly difficult jobs. They put themselves in harm's way every single day. When we call on them for help, they run toward danger. Our instinct would be to run away. They encounter people who are at their worst, and we hope and expect the best from them every single time. They do heroic things day in and day out. They make split-second decisions that none of us would want to have to make, and they get it right far more often than they get it wrong. Despite all they do for us, despite all the good work that keeps our streets safe and that keeps our neighborhoods safe, there is too much mistrust of how they go about their job. We believe that we can improve the administration of justice without making the jobs that our law enforcement officers do more difficult. And we can do it in a way that will rebuild trust between our communities and the law enforcement officers that serve them. It's sadly clear that those relationships, the relationships between law enforcement and the communities they serve, have been frayed, particularly in black communities, but in many places. Too many people in our communities carry the burden of painful or humiliating encounters with law enforcement. They feel singled out, they feel mistreated. For too long, certain traits or characteristics have been linked to crime, and those links are crude and unfair. If you are a black male or an Hispanic male, for example, you carry a burden every day that the rest of us do not. That burden is damaging. It segregates people by class instead of respecting them as individuals, and it compromises the dignity of every person who's a member of that group. We can do better. I think we can set goals and establish standards so that law enforcement and the broader community view people as individuals, accord them respect based on their status as individuals. We can improve the administration of justice and improve the relations between law enforcement and the people that they serve. Today, the Office of the Attorney General is releasing an important document, a guidance memorandum that addresses discriminatory profiling by law enforcement in the state of Maryland. We want this memorandum to create the standard for how law enforcement operates in our state, and here's what it says. When conducting routine police activity, patrols, traffic stops, beat work, unconnected from an investigation of a specific crime, law enforcement may not consider race, ethnicity, gender, national origin, religion, sexual orientation, disability, or gender identity. Period. But police do not have to ignore bona fide intelligence or credible leads. We believe this standard will provide an important measure of fairness and respect for members of all of these groups while improving the environment in which law enforcement conducts its work, keeping us safe. We can't just look the other way when it comes to profiling and hope it's a thing of the past. We know from experience that improper profiling exacts a terrible cost both for our police and for our communities. It discourages cooperation by law-abiding citizens. It turns attention away from real criminal conduct. It can make police work less safe and more confrontational. I truly believe that the work of police will become more effective when discriminatory practices and discriminatory profiling is eliminated. Trust will grow, tensions will ease when mutual respect is restored, and everyday police encounters. In December of last year, the U.S. Department of Justice put out its own guidance, a landmark document similar to this one. It covered federal law enforcement and called upon states to adopt their own. Maryland, we believe, becomes the first state to do that. It's important from a consistency standpoint. Federal law enforcement in Maryland, the FBI, the ATF, DEA, are already operating under these profiling standards, and we're working with them. It only makes sense that our local and state officers cooperate, follow the same rules. It would be naive not to recognize that the effects of discriminatory profiling are experienced most heavily by African Americans, African American men in particular. The Baltimore Sun had a story, I think, on Sunday that showed that while African Americans are 64% of the general population, but they represent 93% of those who are arrested for loitering, 84% of those who are arrested for trespassing. Our guidance memorandum recognizes that many groups have carried out the burden of being singled out, but as I said, the world of law enforcement is difficult. And as we set these standards for discriminatory profiling, we can't and we won't hamstring law enforcement. This is why the guidance memorandum makes clear that the proper role of certain characteristics and distinguishing factors in police work are appropriate. Today, we are joined by many people who work for justice. Law enforcement, prosecutors, advocacy groups. What we hope we're demonstrating is that we're on the same page. This is not adversarial. Everyone knows there's room for improvement, and that's why we're all here sharing this stage at this moment, at this important time. I'd like to first introduce the county executive of Montgomery County, my good friend, Ike Leggett.
Thank you, Brian. And I share your comments both as it relates to the seriousness of this problem as well as the fine work that the overwhelming, the vast majority of the men and women in law enforcement conduct each and every day, and they should be applauded for their work. But let me just give you a real story of something that happened to me just a few months ago. On election eve, I have this ritual whereby I go by and place out a number of political signs at polling stations in and near my home, about 20 to be exact. And on the last phase of that journey, as I pulled up to the Good Hope station, a recreational center, I looked behind me and there was a flashing light of a car. And I said, well, maybe I was speeding coming down the road, or maybe I didn't put my turn signal on. And I was going through my mind, what could this be for? And as I got out of the car, an officer got out, about 6'4", and immediately started yelling and screaming at me, and profanity-laced words that you would not believe, asking very questions in most derogatory manner that you could ever imagine. And as he continued this, a female officer got out, a little bit older, and she approached the scene where this officer berated me at this polling station. And as she looked, she began to recognize that I was dressed here in blue jeans, a baseball hat, and a cap. But she recognized the face eventually, and she approached me, and she said, "One, I did not know it was you, Mr. Leggett." What difference should that have made? Yes. At that point in time, I was simply nothing more than a black face at a night, at a scene, in a situation that could have easily turned deadly. Think just for one moment. Had I maintained my composure. I think, for example, if there was a young teenager who would have panicked in that situation, what would have happened? This situation could have easily escalated. Easily have escalated. What leaves in the remaining portions of this is the impression that a young person would have not only at that incident, but for life as it relates to public safety and police. This is what we're talking about. This was nothing more at this point in time but a blackface. Not the three-term county executive of Montgomery County, not the former chair of the Maryland Democratic Party, not the former White House fellow, not the former captain in the U.S. Army, but nothing more than a blackface. This is wrong. This is wrong. The police later apologized. And what she said, oh, the officer made a mistake. Besides, he's a park police and he lives in Howard County, not Montgomery County. That's sad. That's the reality. And this is what we face each and every day. This is a serious problem and one that we should address. I applaud the Attorney General and his staff for addressing not only a local crisis, but a national crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. Next, we'll hear from Angela Alsobrooks, the very distinguished State's Attorney of Prince George's County. Thank you, Angela.
Good morning. I want to begin by thanking Attorney General Frosh for convening all of us and for putting the full weight of his office behind what is a very important issue. I also want to say thank you to the Attorney General because he has been involved in civil rights and these fights for many, many years. This is not new to him. This work is not new to him. It's not newly important to him. These really are battles that he's been fighting over the years, and I want to thank him for the work that he's done. Today, I believe that we take a very important first step towards ending racial profiling in Maryland. We do this by acknowledging first that it exists, that the stories that we have been hearing here in Maryland and the stories that we've heard across the country are not a fantasy. They are unfortunately a truth that is experienced by too many in our community every day. And we have an opportunity to work for it, to end it, because we are not here this morning just because of today, but we're here because we believe we have an opportunity to change what happens tomorrow. As the county executive has mentioned a moment ago, his experience is unfortunately not confined to African American men, for I have had similar experiences even myself growing up in Prince George's County. I recall an incident when I was merely 14 years old. I was a 9th grade student. I attended a dance at what was Lorraine High School, used to be called Lorraine High School. And as I came out of that dance that evening, I was looking, my parents were there, were planning to pick me up along with a friend. We got out of that dance a little early, and I stood out on the lawn of that school where a police officer had his vehicle on the lawn. I tried to explain to him that I was waiting. My parents would be there in just a moment to pick up me and a friend, where he used the bullhorn to scream at me to get off the lawn, that to move along. He put a big spotlight on me and this other friend, 14 years old, and said, "Get off the lawn, move now." So we moved into the darkness, two 14-year-old girls, where we should have been able to expect the protection of those officers that evening. Instead, we were encouraged to move away from those officers. They never inquired whether we were safe or what the situation was, but to the point of the county executive, we were two black girls standing out there that evening, and we were not offered any safety. I think likewise, as I went on to high school, about another incident where my parents allowed me to drive their car to school. I was in the 11th grade, and they had a new car. It was a nice car. When I was pulled over, lights and sirens, and the officer came to the window. I rolled down the window to see what the problem was, and he said, "Is this your boyfriend's car? Whose car is this? Is this your boyfriend's car?" This is an experience I think that we scarcely forget, and unfortunately it's repeated far too often. As I was elected in 2011, I received the call of a former colleague who was a prosecutor and is now a judge on the district court in Prince George's County, who said to me, "Angela, can you help us do something about racial profiling?" She said to me that her son, Jonathan, who was a Harvard student and a resident who had grown up in Prince George's County. She overheard him on a phone call that broke her heart, that he was talking to a few buddies and said, you know what, man, let's not ride together tonight. I don't feel like getting stopped. And he said that having more than one other passenger in his car almost certainly guaranteed that he would be stopped. And this is the experience of a young man who was attending Harvard, who had grown up in Prince George's County. But again, I'm here because not about what happened yesterday, but I'm here as a part of the solution. I'm here with my partners in law enforcement. I'm proud to stand here with the Chief of Police, Mark McGaugh in Prince George's County, who I believe is doing an absolutely outstanding job in our county. Here with the Attorney General, with the county executive and others, because we are committed to working together to change what has been a very ugly truth, not only here but across the country. I talked to a group of young men yesterday in preparation for today, convened a phone call because I wanted to hear from young men and to say, you know, what is your experience? What is your perspective? And what I heard from them is that it matters in many instances where you live, that if you're in a high crime area, they believe that your likelihood of having increased interactions with police made it so that they feared that they would be mistreated. And what occurred to me is the young men that I talked to and the people that we are concerned about today are citizens. These are citizens who too often, we talk about African American males who have been made to feel like second-class citizens in a country that they have worked for, that their parents have worked for, and this is wrong. Every citizen in these United States of America and residents ought to have the right to feel the equal protection of the laws. They ought to be also allowed to feel that justice is theirs and freedom is theirs as well, and that's what we're here to fight for today. Again, we're here because we are a part of the solution. I believe in Prince George's County that we are doing this work much different than we have in the past, and we're doing a much better job. But we recognize today that we still have work to do. If any person among us still feels that they can have an experience much like the experience that the county executive has recounted or the experience that I have had, we still have our work cut out for us. But we are not fatigued. We know that this is possible. And again, I want to thank our Attorney General for stepping forward and standing up and saying that this will end in Maryland, that this will no longer be a reality for many of our citizens. So thank you, and thanks for inviting me to be a part of today.
Thank you, Angela. Chief McGaugh from Prince George's County is here. He will be available for interviews at the conclusion of the conference. Let me ask Colonel Osborne Robinson from Baltimore City to come up and say a few words. Colonel.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I thank the Attorney General for having us here today. This is a very, very, very important issue. And it's an issue that applies throughout this country. So it was very important that we had some uniformity and some consistency throughout the state of Maryland. And why is that important? One of the reasons it's important is because in today's times, in today's climate throughout this country, you have multi-jurisdictional task force. You see that in Maryland. You see it in all across the country. We stand shoulder to shoulder as law enforcement agencies, not just among our own brothers and sisters in the same uniform, but in the crime fight, we stand shoulder to shoulder with federal agencies, neighboring jurisdictions. So it only makes sense that we have a uniform policy, a uniform guide that everyone follows. Not only that, when you think about it, in the state of Maryland, you have a segment of the population who travels from Baltimore to work in other parts of Maryland, a segment of the population that lives in Montgomery County, Prince George's County. They travel to Baltimore. Then with social events, as well as other things, it's only right that when a citizen is stopped, that the same policies and the same guidance apply throughout the state of Maryland. And the bottom line is that it's about fairness and it's about equity. And the only thing that I'll leave you with is, while this is not the end all and be all, it is a foundation and it is a good step among many that we have already started and that we will continue to do to build public trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Next, we'll hear from the Montgomery County Police Department Assistant Chief Darryl McSwain.
Well, good morning. It's my honor to be here, and certainly want to thank Mr. Leggett for his continuing support of the county police. And I will tell you, Montgomery County, all law enforcement is certainly committed to our decades-old honor code, in which we promise to obey the law and to enforce without any consideration of class, color, creed, or condition. But it starts with hiring the right people, those who have a heart to serve due to the intrinsic value of making a positive difference in the lives of others. Secondly, we must realize that training must continue on the fundamental principles included in this document, and it must be an ongoing commitment on a regular basis for all agencies. And last, we must be transparent in our actions. We must be receptive to feedback, both good and bad, and forever striving for excellence, one contact at a time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Next, we'll hear from the Chairman of the NAACP, Gerald Stansbury.
Good morning. I am pleased to be here to represent the Maryland State Conference on behalf of all 24 branches within the state of Maryland to join the state in taking another important step toward good policing. This is not the first time the state of Maryland has dealt with the issue of profiling. But for the African American community and other minority populations that have felt the anguish and humiliation that profiling leaves, we hope it will be the step we have to take for the last time. The court has ruled on this matter in Maryland. It has told communities and law enforcement what is the right thing to do. We know that good policing, in fact, constitutional policing, can be done without use of terrible and abusive and often racist tactics that is profiling. In the wake of Ferguson and New York City and Texas and other tragedies around the country, the Justice Department has once again had to focus on best practices, which many of us thought were long settled policy. But then we are in a period of snapback on matters of fairness and justice and equality in this country. But while we work together to get ourselves right again on civil rights, voting rights, and human rights, we have to get policing right every day in communities where we depend on police and where, if they're smart, they depend on us. On the ground in our communities, every day as we go about the business of being a community, we have to get this right now. We support Attorney General Frost's decision to have Maryland guidelines mirror federal guidelines. I credit him for making Maryland the first state to issue statewide guidance and for realizing that it's still as easy as it has always been to do the right thing. We want Maryland to be the leading edge of best policy and practice. But we know that good policy without good practice will only lead to another press conference. Talking about doing the right thing without putting the training mechanisms in place by State Police Training Commission and in yearly in-service training programs in every agency around the state is just more talk and no show. The NAACP has worked hard over the years to work with policymakers to have their voices heard and understand the expectations of the African American and other minority communities. Attorney General Frosh has taken the right step, and if all the other steps are taken to ensure that these guidelines are taught, understood, and followed all over the state, it will be enormously important to good policing and the community it serves. Thank you so much, Attorney General Frosh.
Thank you, Gerald. Next, we will hear from ACLU Counsel Tony Holness.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Tony Holness. I am the Public Policy Associate with the ACLU of Maryland, and I am delighted to be with you this morning to welcome the Attorney General's guidance on this very important issue. What we are seeing in Maryland today and really across the country is a groundswell of activism and energy demanding reforms in the way we police our communities, and particularly communities of color, low-wage earning communities, and other historically marginalized groups. And what Attorney General Frosh's guidance symbolizes, and in fact what it is an important step forward towards safeguarding the fundamental right that Marylanders have to be free from discrimination, and at the same time, protecting our public safety. We are thankful for the Attorney General, his esteemed staff, and all the stakeholders that you have heard from here today who have worked tirelessly to make this a reality. I'll close there, and I thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Let me just take one moment and introduce a couple of people. I think Marty Walsh is here representing Senator Ben Cardin, who could not make it today. I wanted also to thank some members of my staff, Thuru Vignaraja, David Nitkin, David Epler, and I would like to now call up Zanita Wickham-Hurley, the Chief of our Civil Rights Division.
Good morning. Again, I'm Zanita Wickham-Hurley, Chief Counsel for Civil Rights and Legislative Affairs in the Attorney General's Office. First, I'd like to start by joining all of those who've spoken before me and thanking the Attorney General by taking this major step forward to end profiling by law enforcement in Maryland. As Attorney General Frosh and others have said, profiling exacts a terrible cost. It damages relationships between the police and the community. It makes the job of law enforcement more difficult and dangerous, and it places an unfair burden on communities who are profiled. It depresses their sense of self-worth. It undermines their belief in public safety, and as you've heard, it is often extremely humiliating. Now that this guidance has been issued, it will be the job of the Office of the Attorney General Civil Rights Division to facilitate its adoption throughout the state, to track that progress, and to identify other steps that may be needed to continue the job of restoring trust between law enforcement and Maryland residents. We believe it is important that every law enforcement agency in Maryland adopt these guidelines, from local and county police departments to state agencies with law enforcement. And so we call upon them today to do just that. Adopt these guidelines and make them a part of the general orders for your department. This will ensure that there will be a process in place in each department to address the violations and complaints that are made related to profiling. And as has been said, it promises greater uniformity and consistency across the state. The Office of the Attorney General is going to work with agencies so that there's a full understanding of how this guidance should be integrated into the daily practice of police work. We will invite representatives from law enforcement agencies to attend several training sessions that will be held later this year. At those sessions, we will work through various case scenarios that will expound upon the guidance and the examples that you'll already find in the guidance document. The goal being to engage law enforcement in real-life scenarios to ensure that they are handled with an eye towards safety, equality, and respect for all those who are involved. Recently, we lost civil rights activist and icon Julian Bond. And as many of you know, Mr. Bond fought and spent his entire life to end and to promote racial and social equality. And in one of his final speeches, Mr. Bond warned that the greatest impediment to achieving racial equality is the narcotic belief that we already have. And so I applaud those agencies that are here with us today in support of this guidance: Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Baltimore City, and all of those who are going to join us in the coming weeks and the coming months. In doing so, you acknowledge the devastating effects of discriminatory profiling and that more needs to be done to achieve equality for all of those in Maryland. Thank you.
Thank you, Zanita. Thank you again, Mr. County Executive, Madam State's Attorney, Chiefs, and the other participants. We're going to stick around and answer questions, so we thank you all for being here, and we're happy to entertain one if you got it for us.
Have you encountered any resistance from agencies around the state?
No.
What's the status? We've got the agencies here, there's some that aren't.
Yeah, no, we have not encountered any resistance. I think the response has been overwhelmingly positive, and we expect it to continue to be that way. Yeah,
for
and
Prince George's.
Angela.
You know what? One important point I forgot to make is that I want to point out that Prince George's County Chief McGaw already implemented, so no pushback. Many of the reforms, or most of the reforms that are discussed here, have already been implemented ahead of this in Prince George's County, and so I think that's important to note.
How much of this is drawn from what you've identified as going on in Baltimore?
We began work on this before that happened. It's been a priority of my administration from day one. So it obviously affects that and plays into it, but we need to do this regardless of what happened in Baltimore.
What's
Yes.
the departments? Under your guidelines, would Baltimore City Police have to disband their stepped up patrols and night crime areas?
No, not necessarily. As I said, the police can act on real intelligence and on credible information. So it doesn't require anybody to disband anything, but it does prohibit pure racial profiling. You cannot say we're going to stop everybody who's Hispanic or everybody who's black and see if they've committed a crime.
So let's say they're not searching for one suspect, it's just a high crime area.
They can focus on high crime areas, but they can't do it based on racial profiling, ethnic profiling, and et cetera.
Since this is not law, how do you compel the departments to adopt these measures?
This is guidance. It's the law of the United States, the law of the state of Maryland that compels them to follow these guidelines.
Mr. Frosh, how do you plan to track whether these guidelines are being used in jurisdictions?
Zanita Wickham-Hurley is going to be doing the best she can to keep track. We do have information that comes to us from studies that are mandated by the General Assembly that will add to the wealth of information that we have. But these guidances apply more than to just traffic stops. They apply to all encounters between law enforcement and the community.